Hi everybody, welcome to the Matt Weston 365 YouTube channel and another entry in the FlowBites series, a number of bite-sized videos that are designed just to give you some ideas and some helping hands with regards to flows and logic apps and what you can achieve. What we're going to be looking at today is how we can use Flow to improve the alerts that are sent out from SharePoint, specifically in a scenario around announcements. How we can send out a rich email or a rich notification to people within our organization, which adds a little bit more depth than the out-of-the-box email alerts. So let's just remind ourselves what a SharePoint out-of-the-box alert looks like. There's a number of options that you can obviously configure to determine when you're going to get the alert. However, the control over the alert template itself is something that certainly within SharePoint Online we can't control. So I'm going to use Flow to be able to modify what my announcement alerts look like so that when my users are notified that something has been posted, then they will be able to see something that's quite visually rich and engaging in order to suck them into the announcement. The first thing I have is a SharePoint site with some announcements on there. I've already created my announcement, which is this one, which is new to Microsoft 365 in August. I've just taken that from the Microsoft UK news site. And if I go into there, I've got some basic content, I've got a title, I've got an author, I've got a background image in terms of the background for the header, and I've got some content. Now, I've created my out-of-the-box alert, and that was the alert that you've just seen in the screenshot. And what I'm going to do then is look at how I can interact with this news item in Flow. And I've already created a basic flow to start off with because there are a few properties that I just want to be able to show you and highlight them because they are extremely useful in doing this type of activity. So at first, if I just can actually look at what my previous flow run, my trigger is when a file is created or modified, the properties only, because that's all I'm interested in is the properties, i.e. the metadata associated with this page. So what do I see as a result of that? I can see the title, which is obviously my headline. I can see who it was modified by. But if I keep scrolling down, there's some really cool pieces of information that I've got here. I've got a banner image URL. So that means that I can then grab the photo, the picture that has been taken and put as the background image for the header in the announcement. So I can use that in my email. I can look at the description, which gives me a summary without me having to do anything of my news post. And the one that I'm really going to draw your attention to is this promoted state. And you can see here that promoted state is 2. Now the promoted state can take one of 3 potential values. It can be 2, which means that it's a news post and it's been published. It could be 1, which means that it's a news post and it's in draft. Or it could be 0, which means it's just a standard site page. So using that as a potential condition when we start building our flow, we can make sure that we're only sending alerts when a news item is actually published and not something that's just been created and put into draft. The other thing that I've actually got here is the first published date. So I can utilize that to make sure that I'm not going to be resending the same announcement update time and again if I don't really want to. So with those few pieces of information, let's go and start to build out our flow. So when I come to my flow, I've obviously got my trigger, which is my when a file is created or modified properties only, because like I said earlier, I'm interested in the metadata associated with the page rather than the actual physical file itself. If I expand that, there's a couple of things that I'll just point out about this, is that my library name is currently set to site pages. If I clear that for a moment, you'll notice that the only options I've got available to me in the drop-down are documents and documents to approve because they are my modern document libraries. There's nothing to stop me, however, from going to enter custom value and typing in site pages. So that will then be looked up by the SharePoint connector and then that becomes available as dynamic content throughout the rest of my flow. The other thing that I've got in my flow already is I have this email address variable, which is just where I'm storing an email address for me to send my announcements to. That could obviously be something a little bit more dynamic based on your requirements. But if I go and add a new step, because what is it I want to do? I want to send an email. So let's go and find my Outlook connector and go Office 365 Outlook. And I'm going to send an email. Now there are two options that you've got here. You have send an email, or you have send an email v2, which is still in preview. Now I tend to always go for the v2 version because that by default is going to send a HTML email. If I was using send an email, I would have to tell the action to actually send a HTML email, otherwise it would just get sent in plain text, and therefore any rendering that I try and put within my email will be ignored. So I'm going to go ahead and use send an email v2. So let's start configuring the action. I'm going to obviously tell it who it's going to go to, and I'm just going to use the email address that I've got secretly stored in my variable up here. I'm going to give it a subject. So let's give it new announcement, and I'm going to start to drag in some of my dynamic content. So I'm interested in the title because that was the headline of the news item. So let's use my title. Then when I come down to my actual body, I can start to implement some HTML here to give my email a little bit more styling than what you would normally have. And if I click this little code view button up here, you'll see that I've already got some basic HTML stored within the body of the email. So I can start to build on this. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to put an enter in there, and I'm going to go start typing in some HTML. So I've used an image, and I've gone img src, so that's the actual path for the image that I want to use. And what I want to do for this, I want to use the banner image URL that I've got within my news announcement. So I'm going to select that, so that then becomes part and parcel of that image tag. Next, I'm going to put the announcement title in, or the headline, and I'm going to wrap this in H1 tags because I want it to be bold, I want it to be nice, and I want it to be, when we talk about accessibility, I want it to be known as one of the main headers within the email. And I'm going to go and put the title in there. And then in the paragraph, let's go and put in there the description, which if you remember is the cut down version or the summary version of my news item. And I'm going to then just supply a little bit more information. I'm going to say that this was published on, and I'm going to give it a publish date. And then I'm just going to close that paragraph off. So I've got some basic information now in my send email. So all that's left for me to do now is to actually go ahead and test it. So I'm going to go and test, and I'm going to use the data from one of my previous runs. Okay, so I've now got greens across the board. If I look at my send an email, I can see there's the body of the email, the HTML. And if I go across into my Outlook app, and let's go and have a look at what my email looks like, I've got my image, and I've got my news headline, I've got my news description, and when it was published. Obviously there's some things that I can do to tidy this up. I can make it look better, I can make it more engaging, I can change the publishing date format so that it looks a little bit more friendly. And that's entirely up to you as a designer to start to play with and find out what works best for you. And you can employ this same technique if you are trying to do a digest. So you could once a day go and get all of the announcements that have been published in the previous 24 hours, iterate through those announcements and put them all into one single email. So it allows you to do this across a larger number of announcements as well. So the final thing I want to do, and I'm only very going to briefly touch on this subject, is apply a condition to ensure that email notifications aren't being sent when they shouldn't be, i.e. somebody's created a site page or someone has only created something in draft. Previously, I would have done that by putting a condition into my flow so that the flow would run, it would determine whether it needed to be sent or not, and it would stop it being sent at the point of branching out the logic within the flow itself. With some of the latest and greatest updates with Microsoft Flow, I can apply a condition to my trigger. And if I go and quickly look at that, if I look at my trigger, I can click on the ellipsis and then go to settings. I now have this trigger conditions area here, which will determine the conditions under which this trigger will fire and this flow will run. But there are a couple of things that I need to do before I actually get to this point here. Now the first is I need to identify what the internal name is for the promoted state. because that's the thing that I need to basically base my condition on. So I'm going to quickly come down here, and I'm going to just grab the promoted state. I'm going to quickly highlight it. I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, and then I'm going to delete that again. So what I'm going to do is quickly fire up Notepad, and I'm going to paste that into Notepad just so you can see what it looks like behind the scenes. Now, when we create a condition on the trigger, I'm actually building an expression. So this internal name is really important. However, what I need to do is just get rid of the parenthesis or the curly brackets, whatever you prefer to call it. And then I'm going to start to build out my expression. So I want my expression to be where the promoted state is equal to 2. So if I just copy that and I bring this into my trigger conditions, and let's just hit done on that. I'm going to go and test that, and we'll see that my flow will run. And there we go, so that's completed. And just really to show you what happens if it doesn't run, or if it doesn't satisfy it, let's just go back to my settings, and let's just change my promoted state to 1, which is in draft. And if I go and test that this time, you'll actually see there you get an error saying it cannot read the properties of undefined because the trigger condition has not been satisfied, so it will stop the flow running. So I'll just go and change that back to 2, which means that the announcement has been published. There we go. So we now have a flow that is going to fire only when an announcement has been published, i.e. the promoted state is set to 2, which means that in terms of our trigger, so that means in terms of our flow usage, we're making our flows as efficient as possible, because if it doesn't satisfy the criteria, it's not going to run. It also means that we can now send a nice email to our users, either containing just a single announcement, or we can use it as a digest to pull together multiple announcements and send them all out in one go. I hope that's been useful. I hope you find plenty of business uses for that. If there's any questions, please do feel free to reach out either through Twitter or through the Microsoft Flow community, and we'll be happy to help. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.